Hello, everyone. Welcome to Multifamily Naked Truth with Elizabeth Kelly. So this will be episode 8. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I was very relieved when you told me naked truth didn't mean that I had to be naked, that it was just we were sharing the unvarnished truth. That made me gave me a lot of peace of mind. Thanks, Corey.
I've had a couple of people actually want to take advantage of that. I won't go into those stories, but it's a creative title, but it seems to be catchy. Always a pleasure to talk to Elizabeth. So obviously everyone in my network already knows Elizabeth. We just co-hosted the Real Estate Resilience Summit back in October 14th to 16th, which was a dynamite event. I learned a ton. We had 23 expert speakers on that. We're actually selling the recordings now for Christmas. It's a great gift. Today, our topic is multifamily investing. And if you don't know Elizabeth Kelly, she's one of the top coaches in Canada. In fact, I would have to say, in my experience, I've known Elizabeth now for about 8 months, 9 months. She was a host on my first summit, the Real Estate Outlook. And I've since learned that she knows so much about every facet of real estate. Like if I have a question about anything, she's my go-to automatically. So she's a professional coach. She was a former trainer with Rich Dad. Again, welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thank
That
you
was a
so much,
mouthful.
Corey, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here, and also for inviting me to host the summit with you. It was truly a fantastic experience getting to know you better, but just the experience of putting together a summit and really connecting with investors and asking what information did people need as the market changed and as it pivoted. One of the most important things we can do when we're choosing our partners and our collaborators, not just in real estate, but in life, is choosing people who have the same goals and values. And the fact that you want so much to give back to people and to help people, I just love that about you. And I'm really happy to be here with you today, especially right before Christmas. Like we're both getting ready to fly out the door and have a great time with our families.
Yes, we are. And there's also a certain level of excitement. And I know this has been a really tumultuous year. I mean, we discussed it in the summit. You've discussed it in a lot of your calls. I spent some time this morning just going through YouTube, realizing that, EK Consulting, your consulting coaching business has been around since about 2020. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was doing some sort of coaching informally prior to that, but I formally set up the company and dedicated a lot more time as of 2020. And I couldn't be happier that I did, because I feel like as much as I loved being a trainer for Rich Dad and as much as I love teaching, I taught 3 courses. I taught a lease options course, I taught a sales and negotiations course, and then I wrote and taught a course called Momentum, which was a foundation course that all investors coming into the Rich Dad program had to take. And I realized that I love doing it, but in 3 days, most people don't get enough. They don't have enough information. They don't have enough confidence. They don't have enough knowledge to be able to actually take action. And that's what I loved so much about, I started doing coaching in 2017, and then I formalized it, of course, in 2020. And the ability to walk beside people and help them figure things out and help them take action, and, celebrating with them when they buy their properties, and, helping them, when they have a setback, helping them figure out how to, look at that, reflect on that differently, and pick themselves up and keep going. It's such a blessing. Like I look forward to every day when I wake up being able to help people invest. And honestly, I think I kind of prefer it more than, I get a property under contract, I'm like, oh good, but when my clients do, I'm doing a happy dance. So I think that too, because you're in the coaching space as well. Like we're just so invested in our clients and wanting them to be successful.
And I mean, I've had a pretty narrow focus over the last 15 years, pretty much specifically multifamily. And like your focus is like you have a very wide breadth of expertise. Like I go on your YouTube channel and I see some of the people you've interviewed, and I looked at some of your coaching programs. I mean, you've literally done it all, like rent to own, wholesaling, flips. I mean, you're an expert on the Maritimes. You're an expert on multifamily. I mean, you're just I wouldn't say a walking encyclopedia. That's maybe a little cliche, but maybe a lot of people don't quite realize just the level of experience that you have in all these different areas of real estate. I can't think of a single person that I could call, ask a question about just about anything, and you could give me the answer,
That's
right?
really kind of you, Corey. I appreciate that. Actually, it's funny. You just brought something full circle. When I was in school, they used to call me the walking encyclopedia, and you've just brought it like full circle. It was mean when they said it before, but you just made that feel really good. So thank you for closing that loop for me, Corey. I appreciate that. And in all honesty, I've been investing almost 20 years. If I didn't have some experiences to share, then either I wasn't paying attention or I'm not being honest. And I don't think either one of those things would be accurate. So, I'm more than happy to share, the good, the bad, the ugly about real estate. Because let's face it, it's been a hairy 20 years in the world of investing. You know that too.
Yes, it has been. And, we were both investing before 2008. I know a lot of, what you and I talked about during the last interview. I mean, you changed your strategy, right around 2008 when you did the Rich Dad program. But, for the purposes of this interview, I want to focus on multifamily. I want to talk a bit about, how you got into multifamily, your first couple deals, your management company, Sandstone Management, I believe, and kind of where your portfolio has gone since. And then we're going to kind of circle back to the beginning, if we have time. I know we're going to dive into this pretty deep. So we'll start with the
Okay,
multifamily stuff first.
I'll try and be brief. So when I met my husband in 2005, he was already investing and I loved what he was doing. So I jumped on board and started buying properties as well. We took our Rich Dad education in 2008. We started buying multifamilies in 2009. We started buying in St. John, New Brunswick. And we really just, at the time it was called ICX. So my husband was just on there every night, just going through, properties, running numbers, trying to see what generated some cash flow, where the numbers worked. That was how we ended up in St. John, New Brunswick. And we bought, over the next kind of 2-3 years there, we bought a portfolio. I think we were at our biggest about 50 units in St. John. And then I kind of said to him, like, I want to have some diversity. I don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. I don't want to take over one city. So I said, we need to find somebody else. And at the time he was focusing on multifamily and I was doing rent to owns, which are my passion. I just love being able to help people get into home ownership because I know it's not easy for everyone. So then he found Kirkland Lake and started buying up there. And we had this whole plan that, what we did in New Brunswick, where we found a great property manager, we go down there a couple of times a year, check on everything, manage the property manager, everything was great. We thought we'd do the same thing in Kirkland Lake. And unfortunately, we weren't able to find a property manager that really fit with how we wanted, our tenants, the relationship we wanted to have with our tenants, how we wanted our buildings run, all those kinds of things. So we ended up opening our own management company initially just to manage our buildings. And then other investors came to us and said, we can't find someone who fits with us either. So we really, over the last 10, 12 years, built this brand for Sandstone where it's, we will manage your properties like a Toronto property manager, but we're in Kirkland Lake. So we had the sophisticated software and the online communication with everyone, and we really built that piece up. And then about a year and a half ago, we kind of looked at each other and we had just come off an all-nighter dealing with a fire at one of the properties. And we were exhausted looking at each other. And we said, this wasn't what we envisioned. And this is why it resonates so much with me. Some people might have heard me say, the life we're living now is the product of the decisions we made in the past. So when you're making your decisions right now, make sure they're creating the future that you want to live. So we looked at each other, we said, yeah, you know what? We really did this because we wanted to create time, and we've both left our jobs, but we both created new jobs for ourselves. And they weren't necessarily jobs that we loved. I mean, certainly I love my coaching. I love what I do, but property management, it's a tough slog. Like you got to be a special kind of person to do property management day in and day out. So then we made the decision to start, pruning through our portfolio and liquidating some of the properties. And now we are focusing more heavily on private lending for the next little bit while we look at opportunities and deals that are coming up, which I believe there's going to be a landslide of them in 2023.
There was a lot to unpack in what you just said. I'm gonna start at the beginning. Now,
okay.
I've pondered this idea of starting a property management company. People have came to me and said, hey, Corey, what do you think of this? I want to start a management company. And, when I started in real estate investing, I had no idea what was involved in management. I would micromanage my property manager. Now I am full circle. I'm hands off. I let them do their thing. They report to me once a month. That's great. So first question I have out of the gate is, I remember ICX. I used to religiously search ICX too. I was an ICX nerd. It's now realtor.ca/commercial is kind of what it's
Yeah.
morphed into. But it was basically the MLS system for multifamily, which at the time when I was new was really the only source to find properties that I knew of. This was before I knew that you had to make relationships with brokers and get out there and network, and make yourself known that you're
Yeah.
a buyer. So obviously, I've heard this a lot. People have said that I want to go to a less expensive market like St. John's. So you're talking about, or sorry, not St. John's, St. John, New Brunswick. I'm assuming that's where it was. Now, at the
Yes.
time, I'm also assuming you were living in Ontario. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Now, I know, at least for me and a lot of my students, a big issue, challenge was niche, right? So when you decide on a niche like that, it's not just like, okay, I'm going to go in St. John's. I'm just going to, go in the phone book and pick a property manager. Here's my property, and you walk away, done.
Yeah.
That process is often very challenging for the first 6 months to a year. Did you get lucky with that property manager, or did you really vet them out? And how did the first year go after you bought your first property? Was it a smooth transition, or was it bumpy?
We had a couple of different property managers in New Brunswick, and it was a bit of a, like, we learned a lot. It was definitely a bit of a bumpy thing. We had one property manager where I'm not sure if it was him or his staff who were stealing rents, but some of our rents went missing for a while there until we fired them. We had another property manager who we were sort of, loosely paying attention, probably not with the degree that we should have been. And I looked at a bill one time, like, a new toilet in this apartment. I'm like, didn't we just do that? And we went back and we started comparing, and we realized they're putting the same repairs through. And this is one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize, is that property management, the margins are very thin. Like, we're talking 10 to 15% profit. So very few people are going to retire from, starting a property management company. It can supplement your income, and it will help to supplement, the repair bills for your units, but you're not making $1 million. You're not retiring overnight with a management company. So what can happen is, if you don't have someone with the right integrity, someone with the right honesty, someone with the right knowledge and expertise, then you could be paying for the same repairs again, or you could be paying for low quality repairs. For our property management company, all electrical work is done by a licensed electrician. But a lot of people say, well, I don't want to pay electrician prices, I want to pay handyman prices. Well, sometimes you get what you pay for, and when you pay for peanuts, you get monkeys. So you've got to be very careful who you're hiring to do things when they're managing your asset. The challenge is, an unethical or a disorganized or an incompetent property manager will eat up all of your cash flow in no time at all. And then your building isn't making money. And when we're looking at properties right now, the margins are so thin. I haven't seen a deal that generated $100 per door in cash flow in months.
And,
So
and you mentioned that actually during the last interview, that you're looking for at least 100 a door in cash flow. Now, is that positive cash flow per unit per month?
yeah, that was our expectation, and that's what we were buying for when we started. I just haven't seen anything like that, because the prices in Canada have gotten so high. You see stuff like that in America now, but you don't see
So
it in
just to put it
Canada.
into context, so if you had a 20 unit building, you would be expecting basically $2,000 net at the end of every month. That's after the property manager gave you the remittance and after you made your mortgage payment and all other expenses.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's fabulous. And that's actually one I'm going to go off of now too. That's a great benchmark, because you'll go like 2 or 3 months or 6 months. Your remittances are great, but then all of a sudden you'll have one vacancy. You'll have a month of vacancy. Then you had to do a repair or something, and poof, your cash flow for that entire month is gone. But I really like what you said about the margins being so skinny for property management companies. And I know it's negative cash flow until you get to a certain point. Like maybe it's 500 units, maybe it's 1,000 units. The property manager that I use in Edmonton, I think they got something like 10,000 units. So they're on a
Wow.
very large scale now. So they're able to get, contractors in. They can renovate a unit in a week because they have the teams available. and it's a really powerful force for me. But I imagine it was very rocky to get to that point, right? I guess as you found out when you started your own company.
Yeah, and what we tried to do is we tried to find ways that we could save money for our owners and for ourselves. So like if we saved money for ourselves, we were helping our, the people we were managing on behalf of as well. So like in town, they were charging $130 an hour for an electrician. Well, we could hire and have an electrician on staff. We became actually an electrical services company and we could charge $90. So people are like $90, but if the going rate's 130 and we're charging 90, you're coming out a lot farther ahead. And things we would do the same kind of thing with plumbers and with some of our other guys where we were trying to get savings based on volume and based on having our own people on staff, and therefore making it a little more affordable for the owners, because property management is a big expense. And a lot of owners, especially newer owners, will come and say, well, can you do it for 5%? And I could do it for 5%, but do you understand what the service is like that you're going to get for 5%?
So in St. John, then when you went there, what were they charging? Were they charging you a percentage of rent, or was there lease fees attached to it? Was it a flat rate? Do you remember how you were
In the
compensating
beginning,
them?
I don't remember what we were paying in the beginning, but in general, we've always paid between 8 and 10% for property management. And then there's been the lease rates or the rent rates on top of that for vacant units.
Does that include an on-site manager? Like, does the property manager compensate an on-site manager, or is that over and on top of that?
We don't have on-site managers at any of our buildings. Our largest buildings, I think, were 25 or 28 units. And it's only really at that point where it starts to make any sense at all to have an on-site manager. And it gets harder and harder to find the right people for on-site management. I find sometimes it can be very counterproductive because things get cliquey, they can play favorites, there's not really somebody overseeing them. So in my experience, I would rather have a property manager and I pay for a service, as opposed to having people on site and some of the challenges and the politics and all that kind of stuff that can kind of go along. I'd rather have someone where I can really lean on them and say, I'm paying you for this, like what's going on here, answer these questions. I like that professional relationship, whereas on-site managers, a lot of times it feels like after a while, sometimes people I find feel like they're doing you a favor and they stop,
They're kind of
sort of
going away.
recognizing.
I found that too with the managers that I use too, like the ones in Saskatoon, they don't use them at all, for example.
Yeah.
But my one in Edmonton, they still do, but they'll often have they own a cluster of, they manage a cluster of buildings in one area. So they might have
Mhm.
one on-site person that's like answering phones and doing showings for 4 different buildings. So it's cost effective for everyone, right? But
Yeah.
management companies are different for sure.
Yeah, and that definitely makes sense. But I find also people don't have the skill sets that they used to. Like, it's
Mhm.
less likely you're going to find a couple where, she wants to do the showings and he wants to do all the maintenance and tinkering. Like that doesn't, people are either working until they're well into their retirement, or they're so done working, they're not interested in doing that either. It gets like I remember we advertised for an on-site manager, I don't know, about 12 years ago. And then we advertised again a few years ago. And the difference in the type of applications and the volume of applications was really substantial.
Oh, that's crazy. So take me back to so what happens then if there's no on-site manager? Let's say you're Sandstone. Let's just jump to Kirkland Lake for a second. On a building you're managing, I'm assuming there's some kind of a sign there for rent sign. Is there a phone number that somebody can text? So who's actually receiving that text and who's actually doing the showing? And how quickly can they accommodate that request? Is that something they have to make an appointment for? Because there's not somebody physically at that building at all times. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. It depends on whether the unit's vacant or not. If the unit's vacant, then, if our leasing specialist, if their schedule lines up with the prospect who wants to see it, then we can accommodate them, usually within 30 minutes or so. We use a pretty sophisticated software called Buildium. So the nice thing about that is instead of having like someone's personal cell phone and, they only get in touch with one person, whether they message us through Facebook or Instagram, or whether they come in through the Buildium software itself, then everybody in the office can see that. So whoever's free jumps on it, responds to it, and that's how we're able to connect with people most efficiently. But the great thing from an owner perspective with Buildium is all of our owners can log in and they can see the state of their buildings. They might be on the other side of the world with a 12-hour time difference and not able to call us, and they can still log in and say, what are the work orders that have been generated for my building this month? What are the bills that have come in? Who's paid rent? Where am I at? And then they can download all that information and take it to their accountant at the end of the year. And it's really easy for everybody. It streamlines that communication process. And that was definitely the biggest difference I've found from when I started investing 18 years ago to investing now is how much technology has improved the timelines and the level of communication between everybody involved. I mean, when I started investing, I was still, the realtor was coming over and I was initialing everything on paper and we were faxing offers back and forth. And by the second, go around, nothing was legible anymore. And we had to do a brand new one in order to get to submit it for financing because everything was such a mess. So technology is definitely something that has helped the world of real estate tremendously over the last, 10, 15, 20 years.
And it sure has. And like thankfully for me, I haven't seen a lot of that because I have managers managing. But I mean, the way things are now, like I used to get checks, sent in the mail, now everything is fully automated. Now I understand that you and Emit have owned, or maybe you do own, like it was up to 400 multifamily units in your portfolio. So I'm not sure if you've sold some off. Do you still own the buildings in New Brunswick, or have you since sold those?
We've sold most of them. I think there's still a couple. And then in Kirkland Lake, we still have a few up there as well. We really just wanted the opportunity to be able to have some time back and to be able to go in a different direction. Emit's an engineer. He's run our construction division for years and years. He knows so much about building and everything. And we really wanted the opportunity to be able to look at something different, like land development. I have a particular interest. I want to find, an existing structure like an office building or like a church or something like that. And I want to go through the process of converting it into residential units. I just see such a housing crisis coming down the pipe. We already have a housing shortage here in Ontario and in Canada. And I want to, kind of be part of that solution, but there's so much to learn. So I'm really excited about that because sometimes, as investors, we might get stuck in our ruts. We might kind of feel like we know a lot, and do we really need to, keep networking or keep educating ourselves? Do I really need to, take another course or hire another coach? But the reality is it gets boring and we get stale if we're not constantly challenged. So that's the direction we've decided to head in at this point. And of course, I'm doing private lending as well, just to keep the money making money, because sitting in a bank account certainly isn't doing anything productive.
Yeah, private lending is definitely good if you have money to lend right now. So I want to just go back to so the future of Sandstone and multifamily. It sounds like you're going to hang on to some of these multifamily assets, but maybe you're getting out of the property management business. Is that kind of what you're saying? Are you looking to sell the company, or are you just looking to switch things up?
We scaled up, and I think we'll probably just scale down. It's not. I mean, there's not a lot of people out there with a burning vision to do property management, let alone, the sort of the type of ethics and integrity that would be really important to me. Like if something has my name on it, I want to know it's the best of the best. So I'm perfectly happy with sort of scaling down in terms of meeting our current needs, and then if they change in the future, we can move up or down as needed. But I think that property managers as a whole kind of get a little bit of the short end of the stick. And, I've been on both sides, so I can see it. But I think there's a lot of expectations about what property managers could and should do. And there's maybe not as much understanding about how tough a job it is and how grueling it is. We've had fires in our buildings, and most people have no idea that after a fire, you have to do a fire watch, which means that every hour for the next 24 hours, somebody has to be walking through that building and making sure that the fire does not reignite. And people are like, well, why is the bill for your services so expensive? Because somebody walked through your building every hour for 24 hours. And you go, well, reignite, how often does that happen? Well, we had one where it happened and the fire reignited, and we had to call the fire department back again to come and put out the second fire because the electrical behind the walls was smoldering, but you couldn't see it, and it reignited. So it's be nice to your property managers because they take a lot of abuse. And I often joke with my staff and I'm like, listen, if we're doing our job properly, nobody likes us. The owners think we're spending too much of their money, and the tenants think we're not spending enough of their money, and nobody's happy. So just be prepared that that's a bit what it's like to be a property manager. Now, undoubtedly, we have some great days where, you know, we help people find homes, and, you know, we make a difference in people's lives. And then we have some other ones where, you know, we have definitely, you know, we've seen people at their best and we've seen them at their worst, and we've stood beside them through both of those. So
basically what you're saying is if I buy 100 plex in Kirkland Lake and call you to manage it, you're probably not going to say yes.
I'm saying don't be a jerk to me. That's all I'm saying.
Fair enough. So I'd like to ask then, this is a question that comes up a lot. So as a multifamily owner, you're going to hire a property manager. I mean, I could go all day on this topic alone, but what are like the top, maybe 2 questions that you want to ask them before you consider hiring a management company as an investor?
As an investor, I always want to know what their rental screening process is like. I know one of the things, you know, one of the concerns a lot of owners have, especially when they talk to a property manager and they realize that they manage their own units and they manage for other people, you want to first of all make sure that, you know, the owner's units aren't being shown preferentially over the other people's, over everyone else's units. But I really want to know, you know, that's our number one biggest risk as investors, is who is in my unit and what are they like? Are they going to do damages? Are they going to be disrespectful? Are they going to cause issues with their neighbors and make my good tenants leave? So that screening process, that is the only time where we have a tremendous amount of control over what's going to go on in our unit. Once a tenant moves in, especially in provinces like Ontario and BC, we have little to no control over what happens, and we're waiting months, if not years, to get bad tenants out. So that screening process is super important to me. I want to know, you know, are they doing credit checks? Have they looked into, you know, some of the programs where it tracks judgments against tenants? You know, some of the screening tools will even do criminal checks. I mean, if I can have people that I know don't have a criminal record in a building where I have a bunch of, you know, seniors and children, I'm going to try and do that. You know, although take advantage of all those tools that are available, I want my property manager to do that to make sure I'm getting the best caliber of tenants. The other thing I'm always curious about is like, how do you decide who gets what unit? Like, I always try and figure out, you know, are these people going to be compatible? You know, am I putting someone, you know, a young mom with 3 kids, or a mom with 3 young kids, am I putting her above someone who works night shift? Like, I'm setting that relationship up to be contentious. So I try and make sure that I'm matching people correctly. You know, I'm not putting, you know, a people with dogs into a building with someone who I know has very clear allergies and just not respecting, you know, people's needs. So that's definitely a second question I would ask. Another question I think that's really important is understanding how the billing works. So, you know, how much do you charge when you say it's, you know, 10%? Is it gross collected rents? Is it projected rents? You know, what is the actual amount that people are charging for property management, and what's included in those services? You know, do you fill all the vacancies? Do you do drive-by inspections? Do you respond to emergency calls? Like, really understanding for what you're paying, what are you getting, and making sure you're comparing apples to apples.
I mean, you just unpacked so much there. That's management 101 in a nutshell. And I just, your first sentence, I was almost just shell shocked by what you said because of my own recent experience. I mean, I had a building that I bought in 2017. I inherited a tenant, and this guy, it took us almost a year to get him out. And this was in Saskatchewan, a very landlord friendly province. I understand in Ontario, you have like a 10-month backlog for non-payment of rent. If someone just decides not to pay their rent, it could take about a year to get them out. Okay, so in my example, we had a guy that was basically, well, he had security cameras everywhere. I think we're not sure if he was a drug dealer. He had some kind of mental health issues, but he was threatening everybody in the building, threatening the property manager. We were finally able to evict him. And then on the way out, he basically totally trashed the suite. He smashed all the electrical plugs. He disconnected the plumbing under the sink, turned on the water, and walked out of the building. Well, there's probably something like $30,000 in damages. And guess who has to cough up that? I mean, the guy's gone. Am I going to sue this guy and recover any of that? So, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. And in this case, one bad egg in there. And even the best property managers I've had haven't completely caught 100% of all the bad elements. Like, I've still had guys come in that have still done to a smaller scale of that. But, the screening process alone, as investors too, we're often greedy about the NOI, right? It's all about the NOI and the cap rate. I need maximum dollar to get maximum refinance, whatever it is may be. And we may get a little bit loosey-goosey on who we put in. We may accept someone that has, maybe crappier credit because they'll pay more rent because they can't rent anywhere else, right? So oftentimes when you buy a building, you'll find, maybe they've just filled the building with people that can't rent anywhere else. And now you're stuck with those tenants. So tenant screening is just, man, I don't even know what that would be like in Ontario, to be honest with you. So that was a lot of great information there.
Yeah, it's always fun. One of the things I do like about being in a smaller town, a smaller community, is I make sure I hire my local staff. And I generally have a pretty good network. I've built relationships with other investors and property managers in town. So if I have any sort of, inklings about someone and it doesn't feel right, then I'll definitely reach out and ask around, say, do you know this person? I mean, it can even be something as easy as, going onto Google and typing it in and, oh, look, there they are on the OPP, they were charged with drugs, 18 months ago. So, word of mouth is definitely something for small town in terms of like, are these, good, honest people? And I tell everybody I show apartments to, I say, we ask for three things: pay your rent on time, take care of your apartment, and make an effort to get along with your neighbors. If you do those three things, we're going to get along really well. If you fail to do those things, you're not going to think we're fantastic. And you can tell from our reviews. There are people there who have written reviews, and I can go in and say, didn't pay rent, did a ton of damages, blah, blah, blah. And it's amazing the number of people who, like, I had one lady who applied about 6 months ago, and she did so much damage in the unit, like $15,000 in damage. And it was a building that was 80 years old, and it still had like the original wall sconces. And we take a lot of care when we do our renovations. If we can save the trim, if we can save the fireplace, the tiles, the lights, if we can save any of that, and it makes sense from like from a safety perspective. But she literally stole the lights right off the walls, and then she came and applied to rent, and I'm going, in what universe would we ever rent to you again?
Man, it's insane. Hey, so I take it with
is.
your management company in Kirkland Lake, are you still involved like on a daily basis, or do you have employees that are working with you on that to help you out?
Yeah, no, we have staff. We have some great staff. I mean, some people have been with us, 8-10 years. We've had the same staff. So we definitely have some highly skilled, extremely competent staff who do a wonderful job. And definitely, there was a while there in the beginning where we were on call, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We were pretty tired at times. But you did make some things pop into my head too. And the one thing that I want to encourage investors to do is don't put so much into the building, into the down payment and the closing costs, that you leave yourself with no money to pay for renovations. Because
Yeah.
I've seen it a couple of times now where a unit has come up vacant, where there's been some kind of emergency, and the owner has said, I put all my money into buying this building, I don't have the money to do these renovations. And one of them was actually, there was a flood and he didn't want to put it through insurance, but he had 3 units that sat vacant for months until he had the money. So make sure that when you're buying a building, that you build in, whether you're borrowing private money or whatever you're doing, make sure you build in enough that if there's a $10,000 or $15,000 bill that comes up in the first 90 days, that you have the ability to be able to pay for that, because it's pretty detrimental if you can't.
Yeah, like what I teach too, and what I learned the hard way, my first couple buildings, because I had to borrow, beg, and scrape every bit of dime just to buy the building, it put me in a very awkward spot when that happens, which it inevitably does if you buy an older multifamily building. You could have 1 month where you have, boiler issues, you could have roof issues. And so
Yes.
what my property manager in Edmonton, what he does is, so first of all, what I tell people is you should have at least 5% of the price in reserves. And now it's actually more like 7.5%. So if you're
Yeah.
buying a $2 million building, you should have 150,000 in reserves that's just sitting there that you don't touch. And you need to factor that into your capital raise, because believe it or not, over 5 years, you're gonna spend some, if not all of those reserves. When I tell people that, they're like, what? I'm going to blow through 100 grand. Well, you better believe it. Like, you wouldn't believe how fast, you can go through this if you have a few bad months. But my property manager, what he says is their integrity is on the line too. They don't want to manage a property where the owner is not going to fix anything, because they
Yeah.
have their sign up front and it reflects badly on them. And this has happened many times where he says, look, we need to renovate these units. This is the only way we can rent them. We're not going to
Mhm.
rent them to people who are going to come in as is in Alberta, because we're not going to get good tenants. So you need to spend this money. And when the people refuse, he actually gives notice, you need to find another property management company. And that
Yeah.
happens quite often. So yeah, what you touched on there was very important. And one of the things that you also said back in the March summit was a lot of investors are, I guess, shell shocked by the sticker price. When you get into multifamily, that's a big holdback, because not only do you have to cover, a massive down payment, you probably have in some cases 30,000 or more just for closing costs, and now you got to put up a huge amount of reserves. But I think for the right building, multifamily is still a really good play, like in my opinion.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people look at it the wrong way. People think of it as a cash flow generator, and with the prices we're paying now, it's not. It's not a cash flow generator. It's a long-term wealth play. And the first 2 to 5 years, you're going to keep putting money in. You're not going to be getting a lot of money back out of it. You will in the future after that. But you will keep putting money in. You'll be, sometimes you might do cash for keys. Sometimes you might have some units that are in some pretty rough shape. My preference, if I'm going to close on multi-units, I would rather close on them, for between March and say August. I'm not a big fan of closing on multi-unit buildings in the winter, because in all honesty, those are the most expensive months, not just from a utilities perspective, but from a maintenance perspective. That's when, pipes freeze and boilers fail and all those other big ticket items can happen. Some of the floods and stuff. I mean, I remember one, my husband and I were laughing. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. We were on call for the weekend, and it was in a 48-hour period, we had 14 emergency calls. And it was because there's 1 week in January that Kirkland Lake goes through this period where it's like between -40 and -50 for like 7 days straight. So for the first couple of days, we're okay. But by the time you get to the end, like anything that was in danger of freezing has now frozen solid. So we had burst pipes, and we had no heat calls, and we had, frozen pipes, and it was a mess. We were just exhausted. So my preference, if I can choose, I'll close on buildings between like March and August if I can. I'm gonna, if I can push a closing, or if I can make it a little earlier, I would definitely do that as well, just to make my life easier, to give me a chance to get to know the building, get to assess the condition of all the, really assess the condition of all the major systems, and make sure I'm prepared before that cold weather comes.
Yeah, no, that's I had pipes burst at my building too. That's the other thing too, you have to get used to as an owner. Stuff like this will happen. Pipes will burst. Your hot water tank will stop in the middle of winter. Your boiler will break down. If your roof is old, you're going to have to replace it. Even the most sophisticated investors that I talk to, deferred maintenance items are not on the pro forma. It doesn't show up there. It will show up on the pro forma if it's new and if the seller has replaced those items. Damn straight, they're going to tell you that they did that. But otherwise, everything's like, you can expect it to be 30, 40 years old. And you are 100% going to get stuck with some or not all of those deferred maintenance items when you buy that building. Now, not to frighten people away, we are in a transition market with real estate. Prices have subsided. I think especially in Ontario and British Columbia, we're a little bit more resilient on the prairies, but we didn't have the massive shoot up during COVID either. So for multifamily right now, Elizabeth, some markets, I've talked to Tom, I've talked to other people. I know in the GTA, it's still really expensive. What are some markets that you would consider buying a multifamily right now? And what would be the expected price point, or what would you buy in at? Any idea?
Well, I'm not really looking at
Yeah.
multifamily right now per se.
Mhm.
I think if I was going to do things over, I think I would stay away. We bought in these tertiary or these much smaller markets because we were
Yeah.
buying heavily for cash flow because my husband and
Yeah.
I wanted to leave our jobs. So we were very quickly looking to replace our income. From the position that I'm in right now, where I have capital, I think I would look more at secondary markets. So I really like Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge, some of those more kind of secondary markets. They've got a really good employment base to them. The numbers, unfortunately, with multifamily still aren't making a lot of sense there, but I love the fact that so many municipalities now are embracing, okay, let's add more units. We've got housing shortages. So, the opportunity to buy a duplex and turn it into a 3 or a 4-plex, I love that. I just find having sold some bigger buildings, it takes a lot longer too. You can have larger buildings that sit, there's a lot less people who are in the market to buy larger buildings. So from the perspective of buying in slightly larger markets where, you can see some regular appreciation, I don't count on it, but it's nice to see it. It makes refinancing and it makes the building a little more lucrative, but also from the perspective of, how easy is it for me to be able to sell or liquidate if a better opportunity comes along. I like the flexibility of kind of being a little more kind of in the middle and not so much at one end of the spectrum or the other. And of course, I would consider like Toronto and Vancouver one end of the spectrum, and then like the small towns in the middle of nowhere, those are the other end of the spectrum. So I think I would stay a little more in the middle would be what I would do right now.
That's exactly what I'm doing too, because like I'll even use Alberta as an example right now. Like if you're buying in Edmonton, there's low cap rates, low cash flow, but it's more liquid. You're going to have a lot more investors that want to buy that. Now, if I want to have cash flow, I got to go to smaller markets like maybe Grand Prairie or Drayton Valley, or areas outside of the city. But then there's added risk in that if it's a single industry town, that industry could shut down. It's going to be tougher to finance that building because big banks may not be interested. You may have to go to like credit unions or alternate sources, but the cash flow is going to be a lot better. You can get up to 10 cap rates in those areas. So, from what you said, I'm sure the decision to go to Kirkland Lake was almost entirely a cash flow decision because you can get the cash
100%.
flow in those markets that you can't get in larger centers.
Yeah. And the thing I think that's important to remember is when we did our initial numbers, I think a lot of people forget to go back, 6 months later, 12 months later. How are your initial numbers standing up? Were they right? Were they wrong? Are you spot on? One of the things I think that people do is they get so fixated on buying a building. Some of the buildings we have in Kirkland Lake, they're 100 years old. Like the maintenance and the repairs on that are dramatically different than they are. Like I was looking in Calgary with one of my clients earlier this week, and I'm like, wow, this building's only 40 years old. And she goes, yeah, most stuff is like that. I'm like, you're not looking at stuff that's 80 or 100? She goes, oh no, there isn't really a lot of stuff like that out here. I was like, wow, like it just makes such a difference to buy stuff that's newer and to hold stuff long term. I would definitely, some of the new build stuff and, some of those opportunities. So much of what we do when we start out as investors is we're looking for these distressed properties and these distressed landlords. But like you said, they come with deferred maintenance. So you better make sure you have deeper pockets initially till you can get all the systems and all the structure up to where it needs to be.
This is fabulous information because I'm getting this. I'm picking your brain on the aspect of being a property manager, like having experienced this yourself and managing other units. You've seen the balance sheet of other buildings as well in different markets, and also from the clients that you've coached. You've got a bird's eye view of kind of what's worked and what hasn't. Now you mentioned private lending, and I'm actually looking at financing options for one of my buildings. So I reached out to you to ask some advice on that, like I do about a lot of different things. And is private lending, let's just talk strictly cash flow. We are at December of 2022. Right now, obviously, you're into private lending because rates are high. What other cash flow opportunities, if I was a new investor coming to you today, I was hiring you as a coach, what investments would you point me in the direction of if cash flow was my sole goal?
Cash flow is your sole goal. I would say, usually the big items that generate cash flow would be flips and wholesaling, right? Like they generate big chunks of money in relatively short periods of time. The problem right now is that the market isn't favorable to either of those conditions. There are some people who are still doing flips and still doing wholesaling, but it's a much tougher market. It's much harder to execute those strategies in a declining market like we're in right now than it is for pretty much anyone. So, we haven't hit the bottom yet. There are opportunities to buy, but I think the opportunities to buy at a discount are going to be, Q2, Q3 next year. Because I think people are, as the rates have continued to climb, and it looks like the interest rates are going to climb still a little bit more, there's definitely people who are in distress. The average mortgage default rate in Canada is under 1%. And from what I'm hearing right now, the numbers are around 4%. So there's all these people who have properties who are in default, and quite honestly, the banks don't want to own them. The banks have no interest in maintaining this massive inventory of properties. So they're going to turn around and sell them for what they can get for them. So I think there's going to be some opportunities.
It's not just the people in variable rate mortgages, it's fixed rates they're coming up for renewal in the next 3-6 months. That these people are very nervous as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was analyzing a multifamily building with an investor earlier this week, and we looked at the numbers, and it was an assumable mortgage because, of course, the owner didn't want to pay to break the fixed rate mortgage. Well, the fixed rate mortgage was like 2.19% or something insane. So for 2 years, the building was beautiful. But if you did, at the end of the mortgage, the refinance rate at 5.5% or 6%, like all of a sudden the building's negatively cash flowing $1,000 a month, and all that's changed is the interest rate. So even if the building made sense on closing with the lower interest rates, it doesn't make sense on refinance. So
I'm actually in that exact same position right now myself. I mean, I'm in the middle of a contract with a building, deciding how to finance it. Right? I mean, do you go short term, try to get the rents up and pray rates aren't going to go up, or do you lock in for 5 years right now? I mean, rates could go down in 2 years. So there's a real delicate balance going on right now. But I like what you're saying about, fixes and flips. I mean, obviously I'm in Kelowna. I wouldn't dream of flipping a property here right now. I mean, we're in the dead of winter. Prices have been going consecutively down for months. We're back to already last year's prices, I think even lower. And I agree with you. I think it's just going to go well into 2023, maybe even 2024. I mean, who really knows, right? But
yeah,
for cash flow
and
investments, it's tough.
well, and in the last couple of years, I would have said, well, short-term rentals are the way to go. People are generating a ton. Well, they're not anymore. People are struggling. When people's disposable income leaves, when people, become concerned about job security and those kinds of things, when people are struggling to, pay for utilities and those kinds of things, they're not taking vacations and they're not spending, $500 a night to rent a cottage. So those short-term rental strategies have become problematic as well. So a lot of those people are pivoting to midterm rentals, or unfurnishing the apartments and doing long-term rentals with them. And this is part of the reason why it's so important that when you buy a property, any property, you make sure that you have multiple strategies to make money and multiple exits. Because if the market changes and one thing isn't working, you need to be able to cover your expenses in a multitude of different ways. So really right now, I mean, even if I was looking at buying multifamily, I don't think the prices have come low enough yet. And buying properties, I mean, I think there are deals out there now for sure. You're still hunting for them though. They're not just sitting there on the, at the tree at the end of your driveway waiting for you to just pick off this nice shiny apple of a deal, right? You still have to get out there and network and find them and put the deal together. I think it will be easier to find good deals early next year. So honestly, my recommendations right now would be focus on educating yourself. If land development is the direction you want to go in, then this is the time to take courses, find a coach. If you want to go into multifamilies, take courses, find a coach like you. This is the time to educate ourselves, to make sure that we're positioned. Talk to our mortgage broker, make sure we have access to cash and capital, make sure we know what we can qualify for, make sure we know what our financing rates are so that when we're running numbers, they're accurate. This time right now, this is when people are preparing. This is when we're training for the Olympics, and we need to be ready to go for when those opportunities start to happen.
I love that. I love that. Training for the Olympics. Man, oh man,
Yeah.
That's going to be the perfect soundbite for this one. Elizabeth, I have to say thanks for the coaching plug. You took the words right out of my mouth with coaching. Like now would be the perfect time to be patient invest in what's out there and to take some training courses. I mean, most people that are the successful people that know have done that. So you're a professional coach, you're obviously incredibly experienced investor in a lot of these different facets. You're also incredibly modest. So I want to ask you about your coaching, maybe kind of how you got into that, and or more importantly, like what services do you offer people today? Like if they call you up, like what can they expect?
You're always so kind, Corey. I love chatting with you. Um, so I think I talked at the beginning about why I love coaching, but what I did with my coaching program is I sort of consider myself, it's like a boutique firm. So it's not a one size all, it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's not week one, we do this, and week two, we do this. I spend a lot of times really getting to know and understand my clients. So in the beginning, we talk about where are you right now? What are your financing options? How much time do you have available? What's your risk tolerance? So we develop a really good understanding there. Step two is to figure out where people want to be in the future. What are your goals? What are your aspirations? What do you want to do with your money? What do you want to do with your time? And then we make sure that we're choosing the right strategy and we're plotting a path. We're designing a roadmap that is going to help people achieve the life that they want to lead, not what they think is going to happen because this is what they think it's like to invest in multifamily or to do rent to owns, but an actual, like, this is a snapshot of what your life is going to look like. And then we just start figuring out what are the pieces that are missing. Do you need some introductions? Do you need some help setting up systems and processes? Are there some gaps in your knowledge that we can help fill in? And we just start literally plugging things in. We start filling in the gaps and helping people move forward. I've hired tons of coaches over my time as a real estate investor, and I have always found that all the things I could do most of them on my own eventually. But by hiring a coach, I shortened the runway. I got better results in a shorter period of time. And I also had the opportunity to learn from other people's mistakes. I've made mistakes in real estate. I've lost money. I've lost hundreds of dollars and I've lost tens of thousands of dollars. And a couple of times I've lost a couple of $100,000. And if I tell my clients how to avoid doing that, they have just paid for their coaching over and above everything else, all the other benefits that they're having. So I'm a little bit biased, but I fully believe in coaches. I still have coaches. And I think
The return on investment, like when you invest in yourself, the return on investment always comes back to you. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely. And the way I approach my coaching program is I'm not going to tell you to go buy this property. I'm going to talk to you about all the pieces that go into it. So how do you analyze a market and decide it's a good place to invest? How do you run the numbers? What should, what parameters should you be using? How do you screen and vet people to put them on your power team? I'm going to give you or help you obtain the skills to do it yourself the next time. I don't expect you to, I don't expect to be in your back pocket from now until you retire as an investor. I just want to help you develop the skills to make really good decisions so that you can achieve your goals as quickly and as painlessly as possible.
So you mentioned Calgary. I'm going to ask about your client base. I mean, do your clients mostly come from Ontario? Do you take on like apprentices, like students from other parts of the country, like BC or Alberta?
Oh yeah, I have clients from all across the country. I'd say probably 60% of my clients are Ontario, but like I have one client right now who's from PEI, but he works in Alberta. So I don't know where you'd put him because he goes back and forth all the time. I have lots of clients in Alberta. I have some in BC. I have a couple in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I've had a couple in the Maritimes before as well. So yeah, I mean, as long as you have the fundamental skills, you're just applying it to different markets. And I actually consider it a blessing because it gives me the opportunity to dig really deep into a lot of these different markets across the country.
Yeah, that was my next question. So not only do you have clients from across the country, you're teaching strategies that apply to different geographical areas. Maybe not necessarily with the same results, but obviously in Canada, different provinces have vastly different rules. Like, for example, like landlord tenant laws, rent controls, things like that. So you're pretty well versed and up to speed in pretty much, all parts of the country.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I encourage my clients to look at. When they're deciding on a market, the very first thing I tell people is take a look at the Residential Tenancy Act. Figure out, what the rules are that are going to be governing your business. And if you're not comfortable with those, then don't even waste your time looking at markets in that province. Move directly to another province.
Yeah, exactly. Good stuff. So yeah, it's something that I think I have to check out myself. I'm planning on my 2023 as well. I mean, obviously I'm going to continue to buy multifamilies, but just circling back to a couple of things you said, I'm not nearly as aggressive as I was. And I think a lot of investors, I've talked to a few multifamily investors from Ontario too, and they're saying that, on deals before you'd find like 10 or 15 people lining up, putting cash offers, multiple offers. Now that's changed. Now you might be the only person offering. So we can afford to, be patient and do proper due diligence on a multifamily deal and not rush into something, and make one of those $100,000 mistakes that you're talking about that I've also made, right? So we can be a
Yeah,
little bit more
and
patient these days.
I don't know if you're seeing this too, but I feel like people, they start the due diligence process and they spend a few $1,000s. They get the phase one environmental done and they see some suspect stuff, but they go, well, I've already spent a little bit of money, so I don't want to lose that money. It's like, no, walk away from $5,000, because if it's going to cost you 50, it's not worth it. So don't be afraid to spend that money to figure out whether you actually want to, take on this building and all the challenges that could come with it. Don't be afraid to walk away from a few $1,000s.
Oh yeah, on a multi, it can literally, they're fatal. Mistakes are fatal. I mean, if you miss one thing on close, once you close, it's too late to realize that you didn't do a proper phase one. You've overpaid. You're negative cash flow. You didn't have someone who could manage it. The list goes on and on and on, right? I mean, even the best buildings that I saw on paper didn't turn out anything like that once I closed on them in that first getting past that first 6 months, right? And as you know from the management side as well. So some very good points that we covered in this hour, Elizabeth.
Yeah, and the thing you have to keep in mind too is be conservative. Like we have a building that we own that when we bought it 10, 12 years ago, it passed phase one environmental no problem. Well, now that we wanted to sell it, the bank was like, no, the gas station is too close. And we're like, the gas station is exactly where the gas station was. It's, 3/4 of a kilometer away down the street. Why is it suddenly too close? Well, it's because the lenders have changed their rules. So now what was fine before is no longer fine anymore. So we have to be prepared that, the somebody's going to move your cheese and the goalposts will change too, right?
Moving the cheese. I think you said that on one of my calls, and that was a phrase that always stuck with me too. And yes, I mean, with multifamily, it's just something I'm used to now. The rules change on a daily basis now. I don't know. We didn't really get time during this hour to talk about, rent to own or wholesaling or some of these other areas that you also have expertise in. But I imagine it's industry wide. But with multifamily, the examples are glaring, at least in my experience, and they happen often, right?
Yeah, and I think it's because with multifamily, you generally hold on to the buildings for so long that the difference is, when you bought and when you're thinking about selling, or when you bought and you want to refinance, those differences become glaringly obvious because a period of time has passed and it's not the same as it was before. I mean, even just looking at, I think I told you I was talking to somebody the other day, and his lender offered him 30% loan to value for closing. I'm like, that used to be the down payment. Now it's the only financing you're being offered. Like, what has happened to this world? And yet here we are. Oh, big financing crisis. Everybody needs somewhere to live. Like, how do you balance those two needs?
Right. I don't know. This is a great interview. We almost have more questions than answers, but this is the way it goes. I really want to appreciate your time, Elizabeth. This was a fabulous interview. I always learn more every time I talk to you, especially the inside track of the management piece. So I really want to thank you for that insight. And that's really going to be especially valuable to my audience on this call.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always such a pleasure to connect with you, and we always have so much fun together, Corey. I know your clients have just as much fun with you as well.
That's the note. So I'm going to drop the links into this call for Elizabeth's, for EK's consulting site. I believe there's a link to set up a consulting call as well. Just a reminder, the Real Estate Resilience Summit, we still have a special on for $29. We haven't set an expiry, but probably the end of the year. Perfect Christmas gift. You can buy that for anybody, anyone that you want. And there's going to be a sequel coming up. So we're planning a sequel as well. You know, we're starting to generate buzz from that. So keep an eye on your emails. We're probably going to launch that in the spring. So more to come.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Corey. This was such a great pleasure. I appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and spend some time on the slopes for me.
Don't worry about that. I will do for sure. We'll talk to you soon, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Take care.
Okay.